Welcome to Cash Flow and Tell, the podcast that uncovers answers to your toughest questions about growing your business from a working capital perspective. Hosted by the people of Fun Through, we dive into real stories and lessons from CEOs, finance pros, and business owners just like you. Today, we're covering the finance considerations for expanding your business internationally. Now, here's your host, Sarena Ally, Director of Partnerships at Fun Through, joined by today's guest, Nikhil Nampalli, Head of Partnerships at Loop.
All right, welcome back. We're super excited to dig into our topic today. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce our esteemed guest, Nikhil Nampalli, who's Head of Partnerships at Loop Financial. Welcome, Nick.
Hi, Sarena.
Nice to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So to get us started, let's get our feet wet. Tell us a little bit about your journey with Loop and how Loop helps small businesses.
Absolutely. Loop itself has been a company that's been around for almost a decade now here in Canada. We started off providing lending services for small, medium businesses, and about 4 years ago pivoted to this new neobank avatar of ours, where now we offer small, medium businesses, a variety of banking solutions. And really the goal here is, if you're a small, medium-sized business today, you're probably doing banking. That can mean payments, could be collecting revenues, etc., across multiple markets. And banking, unfortunately, is very domestic. So what Loop's trying to do is use technology to give you, the small business owner, access to local payment rails, simplified accounts receivable, accounts payable solutions, etc. And that's really what Loop's all about.
That's awesome. I'm sure you're helping a ton of small, medium businesses. What does typical Loop client look like? How do they come to you when you find them?
A typical Loop client is someone who's starting to pay what I call the success tax. They're starting to be successful in their domestic market, be that a provincial level or an online store, and they're now starting to sell abroad or buy things from abroad, and are starting to see that there's a lot of wire fees that they're paying for. There's a lot more activity happening, and the number of transactions that are allowed as part of your free banking package was exceeded, and you're getting charged for every transaction you do, whether it's a domestic or international wire. You're starting to see that your FX conversion rates, so let's say you're selling in the US, repatriating that money back to CAD, you're losing money on FX compared to what the market rate is showing you. So it's in those moments that clients start to look around and say, how can I save some money? Because the success tax that I'm talking about on cross-border banking can be anywhere from 3 to 5%. And so that's significant for a small business owner, where they go, oh, whoa, hang on, I could put 3% more back in my pocket, reinvest in the business, or just kind of take home pay for myself. I'm going to look for alternatives. So that's typically when clients will find us.
Yeah, that's it's really interesting. It's like the champagne problem, right? This success tax where you realize, wait a minute, how do I make my money work a little bit harder for me and really help scale, right? Like that's the name of the game for all the SMBs that we work with as well, when they're trying to figure out how can I make this more efficient and get my business to the next level. And so when they're coming to you, are they typically realizing that they're working with a traditional bank and maybe they're falling a bit short, or do they have more market expansion opportunities that they're chasing?
Yeah. I mean, it can be a couple examples I'll give you to kind of highlight what I'm talking about. So it could be a case where, let's say you're a Canadian business, you've just expanded to the US, right? Or you're selling online and now you're accepting US dollars. So the client will find is, the US buyer, has to send them money, and they've agreed to send them in USD. But the bank account details that they have with a traditional Canadian bank doesn't allow for that transaction to come through, because it's considered a wire or an international wire transaction, even though they have a US dollar account with a Canadian bank. And that's problematic because sometimes the buyer will say, hey, listen, I'm trying to send money to this account number you gave me, but it's not going through. Or, oh, that account number I need to send a wire to, that's going to cost me, 25, 30 bucks. And so I'm going to take 20, 30 bucks off of, whatever I owe you as revenue, right? And that's when the business owner goes, well, hang on a sec. Every time I'm going to collect money from you, I'm going to pay up $20, and then on the incoming side, my bank's going to charge me another $20. So that's a lot of money leakage. Or, using online platforms, be that Stripe or Shopify or Amazon or whatever that looks like. And, you're selling abroad, let's say in Europe, and your European Stripe payments are coming through, and Stripe is converting that back to CAD. And then you pay attention to that statement, and you're like, well, hang on a second. There's like a 3 to 5% less money than I thought I would get when I convert euro to CAD using Stripe versus what the market rate shows me. So how can I get that? And that's where the unlock comes in, because when you come to Loop, we're going to give you a local US bank account, a local European account, a local British pound account, a local Canadian account. And so these accounts look like local. So when your customer is sending you money or a payment processor is sending you money, they'll send it through local payment rails. Doesn't cost them anything, doesn't cost you anything to receive money, and you can collect in local dollars. You don't have to collect them in Canadian dollars. So that is the typical client coming to us and finding these immediate unlocks.
So it sounds like people should be auditing some of their financials, taking a look at where some of these shavings are coming off, whether it's from incoming payments or maybe from operations, and figure out, what does that total cost look like? And is there a better way?
Absolutely. You got it.
And so that's talking about clients who kind of realize after the fact, hey, there's another way to do this. But what about clients who are thinking of expanding? Maybe they haven't got into that foray yet. Is there a straight line path, or how should they be thinking about setting themselves up with operations and finances and even tax strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And think about, expanding beyond the Canadian borders. It's an exciting time in a way, because it's no longer, hey, I'm going to take a suitcase, travel to country X and then expand there, right? That's not how it works anymore. So you could be sitting right in your office or your home office as a small business owner and start to think about, how do I expand to the US? How do I expand to Europe, etc. And in that thinking, I think the key thing is to start with your product, right? What are you selling? Is it a product? Is it a service? If it's service and you can deliver it online, you're starting to think about, okay, collecting revenues using an online payment processor, right? I used Stripe as an example before, but there's tons of those types of providers out there. So once you start to think about that, you say, okay, what dollars do I want to collect this money in? Do I want to collect all in Canadian dollars? Because if you're a solopreneur, all you care about is money coming back to Canada that way. That's great. But if you think you're going to have expenses in that local market because you want to do some meta ads in the US, right? That's going to cost you in USD. And so you may want to take some of your US revenue and hold it in US dollar funds. So those are the sort of questions I think a solopreneur should start to think about. Now, if you're a little bit bigger, let's say you're selling physical goods, there you want to start thinking about, okay, how am I shipping this, right? Where is it getting produced? Is it getting produced here in Canada? Do you have an overseas manufacturing facility? And then how is it getting shipped to the customer? Are you going to use a third-party logistics provider, or is it going direct from factory to location, right? So I'm sure as a business owner, you're starting to think about those things, and you've obviously thought about what you want to do for Canada, but you have to replicate that same playbook for the US. And I think that's when you got to think about, okay, what your sourcing is and what your delivery and your distribution looks like. Start thinking about, okay, how am I collecting these monies, right? Is it going to be invoiced, and I'm going to wait 30, 60, 90 days to get paid? Or I'm going to try to collect online payments, in which case I might have to pay up a fee to the processor, or, now am I collecting in Canadian dollars or local currency, in which case the FX angle comes into play. So that's really what the business owner needs to start thinking about. And then, the other side of this is, if you're a little bit larger, you may be even thinking of setting up a corporation or an LLC in the US or abroad to help, from a legal structure standpoint. And that's where you definitely want to talk to tax advisors and consultants around that, because there's a ton of pitfalls in there. And I can get into kind of stories we've heard from our clients who've gotten some of these things wrong. But really, you want to start thinking about trusted partners you can talk to, banking partners, logistics, supply partners, then trade and tax partners.
So those are all kind of the people that you want around the table when you're setting up your international operations, right?
That's right.
Yeah. And so I'm sure you've seen a lot of success stories. Is there a few mistakes along the way that you can kind of help our listeners avoid?
course, I can. I'm going to use an example of a tax and a corporation setup. I'm not a tax lawyer by any means, so obviously consult your tax advisor on this. But one common mistake that we've seen is you're a Canadian business, you're doing really well, you found U.S. opportunities, and you might be tempted to go just set up a limited liability corporation or an LLC in the U.S. The challenge with an LLC is the Canadian tax authorities look at that very differently. In the US, it's considered pass-through. US taxes apply as soon as you earn your revenues, whereas in Canada, that is not considered distribution, it's considered a corporation. So until you actually pay up or pay to the owners, you don't get taxed in Canada. So in some ways, you're getting double taxed, once in the US at the time of collecting revenues, and then another time when you actually allocate the money from the US entity to the Canadian entity or to the shareholder as dividends, whatever your strategy may look like. So that'll get you in double taxation. That sucks, right? No one likes paying taxes twice, let alone paying taxes once. But that's a common mistake that we've seen companies make. It's easy to set up LLC, it's a little harder to set up C corp or something else. But really, take time, get that right, because that's sort of foundation. And really, you're not looking to do this, until you're a little bit bigger, which also means you probably have decent amount of revenues on which you're paying taxes for. So this is a big one. So talk to your tax accountant, make sure the setup is right. We've had quite a few clients who've gotten that wrong in the early days and have had to kind of go back and fix it.
Yeah, I bet. That sounds like a painful one to get wrong as well. As a neobank or even as a traditional bank, I'm sure there's lots of red flags that kind of make some of these SMBs get on your radar. What are other activities that maybe raise some of those risk flags, and how might people avoid them?
The big one, I'd say, a small medium business will find itself is when they're making large payments or are receiving large payments, from their customer, right? You just got a big break, massive 100, 200, $500,000, incoming invoice payment. Those are the sort of things you actively want to communicate with your bank or your fintech, because it's large payments that look unlike any previous patterns, right? That get flagged by the bank compliance teams and funds get held till things are clarified. Yeah, you can go through that process. It's not like, that money is going to be withheld from you forever. The bank will just have more questions for you to make sure it is you that's the intended recipient, or it is you trying to send that money to a producer. And sometimes those timings are critical, right? Because your manufacturer tells you, look, I better get payment by Friday if you want me to start producing goods for the fall season or whatever that looks like. And this payment doesn't go out on Friday as you thought it might go out. It may not go out till next Wednesday or Thursday once you're clear with bank compliance. So those are sort of things you want to proactively communicate with the bank or your fintech partner. Let them know, hey, I'm making a large payment, so that's going to look unusual, or I'm receiving a large payment, that may be unusual. So I'd say that's the big one that people should pay attention to when you're kind of starting to think about cross-border or even domestic sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to land that great big new buyer, and then all of a sudden when they're paying you, you have a problem. Is there an example of how you've worked with a client kind of hand in hand to resolve some of that?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we're obviously constantly trying to improve, getting to know your customer activities. So, when we onboard you, we try to understand what regions are you operating in. And part of that, dialogue allows us to say, okay, you're going to need a US dollar account that's based out of the US, a European account that's based out of the Eurozone, so you can collect locally. And then we try to understand, what kind of revenue source do you have? Is it payment processors paying into your accounts? Is it invoice payments from large buyers? Is it smaller buyers? And then so that's on the inbound side. And the outbound side, where is your manufacturing happening? Or what are your big lumpy accounts payable, right? So as we get to know you, like those are things that we're monitoring for, because then that makes it easier for our teams and honestly with our systems to identify fraudulent activity or suspicious activity. So that's the sort of stuff that the more data we can get, the better we know you as a customer, what kind of payments you're making and payments you might be receiving, and just makes that experience much cleaner. So we have plenty of examples where clients either share with us upfront and we've kind of made note of that, or when they're making these sort of large payments or they have expansion plans, sometimes they'll come to us and say, hey, I'm expanding to this market. Here's the buyer that I'm going to be working with. And often, they'll ask us, do you have credit services, growth capital capabilities that can help us? And that's sort of where, depending on what kind of mode they need that in, if it's a credit card, we can offer it. If we can't, we partner with like yourself at FundThrough to provide invoice factoring capabilities to just get them that growth capital that they're looking for.
You got to think of your bank partner as your partner, right? And kind of tune them in and keep them in the loop on what your plans are, your expansion plans. I'm sure there's a whole variety of ways that clients show up to that partnership meeting if they're coming to talk to you about an exciting new opportunity for them. What's some advice that you might give to an SMB on how to help them prepare for showing up in the right way for a bank?
Your bank is probably one of your most critical and trusted partners. And so the advice I'd have is disclose upfront, disclose often, right? And then, produce the appropriate documents when asked, or to the extent that you can proactively produce certain documents, do that, right? So whether that is, proof of ownership stuff when you're setting up the account, whether it's financial statements to show how you're growing as a business, and, the desire for more credit is obviously a big part of, looking at your financial statements. So I'd say that's really the critical part, right? Which is, just like with your tax position, right, where you're giving them all of the right information up front so they can make the right tax filings for you, so you don't make a mistake with that. Same thing with your bank partners, right? Because once you start making mistakes with your bank partners, your transaction activity, again, like I said earlier, right, could be held because, again, the activity doesn't make sense relative to what we know about your business.
Yeah, absolutely. Show up for those meetings prepared with all your documentation in order and treat those bank partners as a true partner, right? Because the more that you can tune them in to what's happening, the more that you can both be better prepared for what's coming.
That's right. And look, we're here to help ultimately, right? Yes, we're asking for a lot of documentation, and it's not because we need to like check a box. It's really because we want to make sure, we're able to process and support you in your kind of growth and expansion strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're in this together, right? Like the more successful that a client is, the more your business grows as well. And I know that we're certainly in that case as well. And so we've talked a lot about a lot of different things. We talked about expansion and tax strategies and how to set yourself up for success, how to avoid pitfalls. If you had 3 key takeaways, I know that was a lot of information, but if you had 3 key takeaways for an entrepreneur who wants to expand internationally, whether it's to the US or some other market, what advice would you give them?
Yeah. Look, if I had to sum everything we've discussed, right, it'd be 3 things. One is stop the leakage, right? So audit your bank statements or credit card spend, etc. Look for wherever currency conversion is happening, wherever there are fees, account fees, monthly payment fees, per transaction fees. Look at that stuff, add that up, and ask yourself, is there a better way? And I can tell you there's always a better way. So keep an eye out for this. So stop that leakage, because that can be, like I said earlier, 3 to 5% of your revenue that could go right to your bottom line. So just stop the leakage. The second part is you can act local, but really start thinking global. So whether you've already expanded or you're thinking about expanding, the nice thing with technology providers like Loop and others is that you could be based out of one market, but have access to banking, payment, card rails in multiple markets. Right. And so what that means is you're no longer geographically restricted in terms of where you do business. And to expand globally, there's a ton more new technology that makes that easier today. And that's really helpful because the buyers, your customers, are going to think that they're working with a neighbor, right? That they're working with someone local, not someone who's abroad. And that builds trust between you and your customer. And as we know in business, trust is everything. And then the last bit is liquidity is speed. In today's day and age, anyone can open up a store, anyone can kind of move to markets, etc. But what matters most is, do you have the right liquidity and the working capital that you need to perform expansion activities? And so again, there are tools, and I'll use FundThrough as a great partner example, right? Who you can work with to get paid up front. So you might have net 60, net 90 terms with a buyer. Now that's locked up revenue that you're not able to access to grow further. Someone else has figured out how to unlock it. So what I'd have advice for you is find partners like FundThrough who can pay you that money up front, so that liquidity is with you. And now that's speed for additional marketing campaigns, new market expansion, whatever that looks like for you.
Love that. Thank you for the shout out as well. I appreciate it.
Right.
Great tips, Nick. This was very informative. Really appreciate your time and sharing with all of us some ways that they can set their business up for success. And I just wanted to thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Let's go over 5 key takeaways for you to apply to your business. Number 1, stop the leakage. Take a look at your bank statements and credit card spend and look for anywhere currency conversion is happening. Wire fees, account fees, per transaction fees. Cross-border banking costs can eat up to 3 to 5% of your revenue. Number 2, if you're a Canadian business expanding to the US, think carefully before setting up a legal entity south of the border. An LLC might seem like the path of least resistance, but it can actually result in double taxation. Once in the US when you collect the revenue, and again in Canada when you distribute it. Always consult a tax advisor before making that decision, because getting it wrong is a painful and expensive fix. Number 3, get ahead of large payments by communicating with your bank or fintech partner before they happen. Whether you're sending or receiving a big payment, unusual transaction activity can trigger compliance holds that freeze your funds for days. Number 4, act local, but think global. Technology today means you don't have to be physically present in a market to operate like you are. You can hold local bank accounts in the US, Europe, the UK, and beyond. So when your customers send you money, it feels like they're paying a local business. Number 5, remember, liquidity is speed. A lot of businesses are sitting on locked up revenue because of net 60 or net 90 payment terms with their buyers. That's money you've already earned but can't access to fuel your next move. Tools like invoice factoring with FundThrough, which let you get paid upfront on those invoices, can give you the working capital you need to take on new markets, launch new campaigns, or simply keep growing.
Thanks for listening to Cash Flow and Tell. From all of us at FundThrough, we hope this episode got you one step closer to growing the business of your dreams. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.